Before the summer starts to roll around, Disney loves to release most of their studio films, more specifically in terms of their live action films if you don't know what division I'm talking about. And because this season is coming close again, and I continue to debate watching more of these again and again, and I still will, comes a time to revisit one of their biggest hits for something so mediocre. The path of every remake taking a stupid turn for its disrespectful roots and monetary gain the more they did it. So the more that they actually did it, the more they actually straightened the animation much more when everything worked there rather than humans working with weird CGI creatures. And one of the most strangest highlights of this happens to be back with Aladdin in 2019, the next big Renaissance film remake after Beauty and the Beast, which of course was the same case in the original animated films. And Aladdin happens to be, just before The Lion King, Disney's highest grossing film at the time of its release, creating a beautiful story with wonderful characters about friendship and love, showing an audience a whole new world that was possible in Disney storytelling. One that took place in such an interesting region like the Arabian deserts that it hadn't explored up until this point in time, where despite some scenes people having issues with, it still was very good. But when they announced the remake of Aladdin, people did start to turn their heads with suspicion compared to what had been released beforehand, since matching characters like Robin Williams' portrayal as Genie was going to be virtually impossible, where the best thing that they could ever do, to everyone's mixed opinions, was in fact Will Smith in the pre-slap times, who no one could ever think pull off that genie we fell in love with, including when people first saw the footage of the blue genie for the first time, and it looked so gross from that angle, meaning it was going to be a bad type of film. But then after the movie came out, most people actually came around his portrayal of the genie, not trying to be like Robin Williams, but indeed his own version with what he could do. However, this did not mean the film wasn't bad. It is still pretty terrible with its weird decisions both inside and outside of the story, where its real issues rely in the other parts of the cast. This fact actually turned out to be Jafar's actor's portrayal of the character, who did not do any justice to match the sly villain we all knew, and it's frankly so toned down that you wouldn't expect him to actually be Jafar at all. Where when Beauty and the Beast began to add small things like new songs, this would continue such a trend in more negative light, combined with their original casting choices of characters who did not match nor understand the point of the original intent. That Aladdin showed us what they thought they could do that could be no wrong because they can add a different variation to its benefit, but how sometimes it just turns out to be a bad play that ends up being disrespectful. Also trying to add brand new additions that weren't in the original, like the Billy Magnuson prince, adding someone of a different ethnic region that clashes with the setting of the film coming so far away. Which, fun fact, he is also starring as Pleakley, giving more reason to talk about this film today when they just reuse whatever actor for their new films. Just the start of these remakes having so many problems, adding so many little things that makes everyone upset rather than happy. Too big and too bold for their egos to stop, which of course didn't stop them from making $1 billion in this film because it was still that story. Compared to my other full videos on remakes, I'm just gonna keep this one shorter as much as possible, focusing on the story between the films, as this shouldn't be worth the energy to hate on that much. So let us begin. When we are first drawn to the world of Aladdin, we first travel with the peddler singing Arabian Nights and introducing us to the genie's lamp and Aladdin's story. He is our guide, taking the audience on this mysterious journey to find a diamond in the rough, the person amongst the streets destined to do greater works for the mystical and the royal of society. But when we begin the remake, they take this drastically different approach, being on a boat in the daytime with Genie in a human form. Of course, you don't know that yet or need to make the assumption, considering it is a version based on the peddler who was not revealed at all to be the genie if you watch the series, where earlier versions did have him reveal himself to be the genie, but how they just kept that out and ambiguous to the audience until again they watched the show when he appeared to be separate, or even in Kingdom Hearts for that matter if you were interested. But here, we see him travel with his children on a boat while his wife is tidying up the ship, sitting them down to tell the story of Aladdin, thus beginning the Arabian Nights in this film. It's not something I can really hate at all, preferring them to do what's best for his character, which begins with the fact that they're clearly different, and that's a good thing. However, it doesn't feel quite as magical or personal as the original, since the peddler does speak to us in the audience that connects to a certain figure searching for artifacts or other riches, which also speaks to the new problem that this film begins with compared to the original, when they put the scene here first and do the next one like this. We'll see this example in just a bit, where I have to mention that the visual and musical style of the film, the remake just features more regional instruments to give it a more realistic style to it, and where it takes place compared to the whimsical orchestral tone of the original. What Aladdin said by pulling his original score from the film and making it more live action in its tone and texture. And I completely get that with how each song is played, and I enjoy their attempts at separating each other in mostly every aspect, but like everything else, it still feels dull in comparison. I'll bring up this point later when the whole new world scenes appear, since that represents everything about the film, where we go back to how scenes are more jumbled in this film for some oddly stupid reason. This starts in the first act, where they completely cut off Jafar's first introduction, skipping straight to the marketplace, which is the first sign that tells me they weren't really confident in this version of Jafar if they wanted to wipe that out. Sure, it's trying to be different with its pacing and introduce characters in another variation, which can work to a varying degree, but knowing how everyone did not like his portrayal, I just get this picture that they weren't willing to shock the audience into how bad this portrayal was compared to Jonathan Freeman's original, which I really don't mean any disrespect to Kenzari, but it's just how they directed it. Because in the original, he travels to the Cave of Wonders with his servant Jasmine, who he sends in there, but how he wasn't worthy enough by the Cave of Wonders when it collapsed, whereas the villain, he has to send others to do his dirty work. The point of this scene is to show how only someone worthy enough, a diamond in the rough to be more specific, can be allowed to enter the cave and live, since it consists of treasures that would make you rich, including the genie's lamp, where I guess they just wanted to see his face as fast as possible so we know how he actually lives. Well, I don't mean they actually delete it by completely remove it, it is actually still there, but it's only very short in the opening sequence of Arabian Nights, the scene where the peddler starts to travel and then talk to us in that regard, but the entire sequence with him talking to Kazim no longer exists. And that's a disappointment because we still don't know much about Jafar other than the fact he's out there. That they're saying, yeah, he's there, but we're not going to focus on that quite yet. And it's a more slower, long dragged out sequence since they deleted Jafar's scene where Aladdin was introduced being chased by the guards because he stole a loaf of bread. So in this version, they want to give him a little bit more backstory, where it appears he steals other items that people report to survive, which everyone seems to look down upon. Where also immediately we discovered that Jasmine is already in the damn marketplace when Aladdin first meets her, like only less than 10 minutes in the film and she's already there, compared to say getting to actually know her character first after Aladdin's scene as the Princess of Agrabah living in the castle, and having motivations to get out in the marketplace. So instead, in 8 minutes in the film, the movie already ruins a lot about Aladdin based upon them cutting the film up to be shorter, even though these live action films are almost like an hour long, just as this film. I discussed this point previously in The Little Mermaid that came out a few years after Aladdin that expanded the movie but for unnecessary reasons, and this movie just unnecessarily moved things up and puts other stuff in its place that drags it on. So this is actually where One Jump Ahead finally plays to its audience to catch us up for the first time when you hear the main soundtrack play after Arabian Nights. And, well, it's kind of rough to say the least. Even though we just talked about them using regional sounds to be more live action, it kind of feels artificial and out-of-tune to some degree. It doesn't feel natural like the original, which is wild to actually say. Some of the scenes in the songs are just so dull in comparison when the guards finally chase him down, and actually Jasmine too to that extent, where they were meant for larger than life moments and actually good action. A good example, or bad in this movie's case, is how they weirdly speed up some of the action when the lyric Ahead of His Doom plays. In the original, he disguises under a buff dude, but now with Jasmine, they get out of a small corridor and board this cart, where you can clearly see that they sped up the footage to make it more wacky to counteract the original version and its own exploits. It's something that shows a great weakness to the film because of the fact when they do this, we know that the animation can do things that humans can't even do in real life, that they're trying to be crazy to try and actually justify it, that even though they can make these films, they still have to do something in attempt to that regard to why we love those films, or why they even made them do this in the drawn form. It's just so stupid and already makes me hate the film because of this pathetic attempt to do what has already been done before, and to do something different that's so jarring because, you know, it's not natural. Like, are you sure that's how human moves when they actually speak or sing in a normal tone? Because I'm pretty sure that's not what happens. But finally, we're actually introduced to Jafar in this part in the newer version, after the song in the dungeons, searching for that same diamond in the rough when we hear him speak about these things. And when we hear him speak for the first time, we can already tell he's a bad Jafar.
Bring me the rough, but never a diamond.
It's just a much more toned down version of the very first scene because we explore his search after the fact of Aladdin rather than before, or angrily explain why he's here in the position to kick down his servant. And it doesn't work for me because the point of the introduction was that basis with Kazim swallowed by the Cave of Wonders and him trying to find the next. Again, putting him here after the fact is an expression of no confidence or your character or your story, because you think you could just make slightly different changes and we wouldn't even notice. Like, that's why we think these films are just simply throwing mud at the wall because you repackaged something already done. So moving back to Aladdin and Jasmine, we get to see her revealed to be the princess and the state that Aladdin lives in. Well, at least in our case, we know that she is the princess and not to Jasmine, where she's disguising as her personal handmaiden Dahlia, who Aladdin almost figures out as that street rat with street knowledge of things that royals wear, which is a nice thing for his character, knowing so much, being out there and adding an aspect to how he survived for so long being on his own, yet not as strong as you think because Jasmine is already here.
Only someone from the palace could afford a bracelet like that, and that silk lining is imported too. It comes from the merchant boat straight to the palace, but not to servants.
Because after one jump ahead, when Abu and Aladdin successfully evade the guards and get the bread, is where they actually give up their bread to some poor children, where his heart is actually filled with gold, caring for the common good of people, above even his own as a street rat, making it out to survive. And that's not really in this film since Jasmine was already here and gave that bread away because she's a heart-filled princess. That this is instead the part to explain why Jasmine is going out or can't as mandated by her father because of an incident related to her mother.
Ever since my queen was killed, the Sultan's been afraid, so she's kept locked away.
Seems everyone's been afraid since then.
That it's more than the plot of the Sultan wanting his daughter to marry someone because they didn't mention that fact, and important regardless to continue the bloodline obviously. So again, you're just going with this weird flow of the story, moving forwards from backwards, placing this right here instead of later. But the point of making those scenes was to show us each individual perspective from your villain to your heroes, and you weirdly combine all those facts together before we even learn about them separately. Or just because it's a remake where you must do something unique with the film, it doesn't mean you should interrupt the intended process that we get to know the characters with. It makes things more shallow and exactly what we expect in a soulless cash grab. Involving her early on is not the right thing to do because we should get to know them personally by themselves, with this still having a majority of the same events combined in those scenes except for major tweaks here and there, like the ending of his reprise in the daytime rather than the nighttime where he wants to go and the characters just don't like that. They really just didn't need to do this at all, since the next scene is something that could legit take place before, since we first see Jasmine in the next part where she goes to meet one of her suitors. This scene is where the future remake politically enters the picture for some reason. Like, I'm not really sure about this case where you wanted to include princes from places like Europe here rather than how they would come from the local region. It doesn't make sense in my mind other than a film doing a film thing. And then the point that Jasmine just doesn't like any of them since she wants her own choice like the original. Like, in the case of the original, it would make more sense that she meets him later on, since this is the case of her life in the current state of things when we know Jafar and we know the Sultan. And going there from here just, puts things out of focus. Of course, for now, I have to take a pause to mention her being portrayed by Naomi Scott, whose work I've followed since her time on Disney Channel, including movies like Lemonade Mouth, a movie I will one day cover since I want to do more videos on the channel if I'm popular again, and then enjoying her portrayal recently in films like Smile 2, also proving no disrespect on any of the cast from Mana as Aladdin to Kansari as Jafar, but still not really liking what they did to portray this. Just like how we have this CGI Raja in the damn film, which is so apparent. Of course, that's probably done for safety reasons of both the cast and having an actual tiger on set, but still, it doesn't hurt for the fact that they could have had real animals like a real Abu and a real Raja. A fact that many films have done before to include real animals, but how Disney live action remakes just decided to, animate them, which completely defeats the point of even doing these films at all. But this all leads to our first taste of the new main song they have in this film titled Speechless, which is absolutely horrible in my opinion and out of tune of what Aladdin was all about or ever needed. And we'll mention that later when the actual song plays, where this just shows how they started to use newer songs in this film, of adding characters and moments to add more depth, which was good to start out with, but the newer films just kept butchering these things later on. In the instance of wanting to make a point to have Jasmine's voice heard over the ruling men like Jafar as the Grand Vizier. So moving back to Aladdin is where we take a drastic different turn for the film not seen before, where he sneaks into the palace with Abu's help, because remember, he didn't do that before when he was out with Jasmine and actually got caught under Jafar's orders since she revealed herself right there that she was the princess, but they evaded them here because the introduction was shorter, that they did this as a new way for Jafar to finally get Aladdin to help since they did things out of order. Like Iago finds where this diamond in the rough is when we spot him sneaking out, hiding in the castle to meet with Jasmine, rather than having his own magical hourglass display who he was when he was with Jasmine out in the marketplace, which is idiotic because he could have missed where he was and wouldn't know how to get Aladdin for his plans, rather than finding out when Iago worked to run the machine and he got slapped. Like, if he missed his chance here, he probably would have never met Aladdin at all, or could have used his help, which defeats the point of the film. More and more, this film removes the powers that may be that brought them all together, both evil intentions and good-hearted, where it just happens by chance appearing right there because they place their bets on you already knowing the story, where why even waste your time unless you can get something new out of it. Such as when Aladdin finally sneaks up to meet Jasmine again, still only knowing it's Dahlia, who tries her best to keep that secret since she isn't the princess and invites her out on a date in that sort of way, which is where he gets captured again in the scene so Jafar can take him out in the desert to talk. Like a very pointless, elongated version of events compared to the original order to get him to the dungeon, which Jasmine literally reveals her true nature as the princess before disguising himself to help, rather than to appear as the wicked self or Grand Vizier, where Jafar is the one who does the revealing that it was the princess to help him.
I was talking to the...
She was toying with you. It amuses her to meet commoners.
And I think this exists mostly because he can't portray a different character, and is confined to what he can do as Jafar, which doesn't need to be this way considering you could get another actor to disguise himself to connect. Sure, it might be the manipulative reason that Jafar worked his way up as a common thief in these events to relate to Aladdin, but his character acts above all, wanting the Sultan's power for his own personal gain, where he would not be interested in helping a poor, miserable street rat, because it's just not in his nature to do so. You just put more constraints on him and it actually hurts him rather than helps him that makes it better. Better of course being in terms of a decent movie and not even remotely better than the original because it never can. Jafar here then offers Aladdin immense riches if he retrieves the lamp to impress Jasmine finally, entering the Cave of Wonders and of course his own freedom rather than of course because he was captured by the guards face execution or whatever they do to prisoners. He did offer a reward originally, but he was disguised as an old man himself who knows the way to free others in the dungeon, and did tell Princess Jasmine early that he did order his execution to stop her from exploring further. So there's not really much to tell here that's different, where he goes down and gets the lamp just as the original, where Abu's greed is too much and causes the cave to collapse. But how in this sequence it's just Jafar in full dress rather than himself being disguised, delivering his eternal reward. And after the cave collapses, Jafar finally screams out that he didn't get his lamp, trapped again with Aladdin who was saved by Carpet, where I just want to share you this one clip that perfectly shows how bad he is as the new one. Yeah, you really can't take this Jafar seriously. Like, I'm sorry man, but this is just so lame. Because you're saying that I should take this one and think it's the same as that one. No! Because it really just doesn't work out right. But now we finally get to meet our genie once and for all, where yeah, this still doesn't look very good either in this form, no matter how good his portrayal could be for this version. Again, when we speak of Aladdin, the best part still remains to be the genie, whether it be Robin Williams or even Will Smith's version if you separate them based on their own distinctions, even if Robin is still the master of that and cannot be taught. So the strongest aspect of the movie is based on how they're willing to actually do for Genie in Will Smith's version, when it comes to his comical aspects and how he performs the songs, which most people actually did like if they take his own discography into account with his music. Unfortunately, it still proves how valuable the animation was because of how you could use someone's voice to imagine a million different things. The animators had a lot to work with based on Robin's impressions to do whatever they could draw based on his own improv. Like it could be this or could be that, and Will's Genie is just more limited to the functions of realism or the jokes he could perform best, to whatever's best physically possible to a human's eye, which also speaks to the advantage they use when it comes to their dance choreography, where when most of the film lacks in expression or attempts to, it makes up for its fun dance sequences that should be applauded for the effort they did to make this movie fun for the public to still enjoy, despite its numerous stupid differences. But the key difference in the scene is the escape plan, the strategy that Aladdin employs to have the genie get them out of the cave, getting to his ego that his powers couldn't even get them out of there, which causes him to do that and give in. However, in this version of the movie, they shortened that to him willing to actually give his wish to the genie to get out, but actually delegate that to Abu holding the lamp in order for his wishing him out, which is a nice trick to keep these 3 wishes intact, even though it's far more preferable that he did get to the genie without any of the wishes verbally. But we can't because Will Smith can't actually portray what Robin Williams did. Also, there's this other fact that the movie really hates Jafar and doesn't want him to cut in too often, so they keep on Genie and Aladdin in this desert instead of the oasis. And seeing this, it's just somehow very apparent that they don't want him much in the film because that would require him to be as good as the actual villain, where they use this moment to have Iago plan to marry Jasmine and take the throne, giving him the idea that's so deliciously evil that they both celebrate. And that really isn't in this version at all. He has no plan whatsoever until the end of marrying Jasmine other than his own ambitions that we will later see after Prince Ali. But to make up for it, they make Will's genie turn into a human for these personal scenes to blend in, and to save time on animation because it does still look awkward. The genie actually does turn into a human prince in the original Prince Ali, but that's just for this song, and most times he prefers his own genie form since he can easily swap in and out. But that's not something easy you could do in live action, and you kinda need him as an advisor when it comes to the important meeting with the Sultan. Again, I will say I appreciate the entire choreography of the film and what they do with Prince Ali, where there's nothing really to criticize about its own take, where it can balance itself out on both positive notes, even if there may be few of those. Yet how it goes back to being embarrassing again because they make Aladdin look awkward in front of them in the way he speaks, trying to appear like a prince but failing compared to the confident swagger he has with ease to the eager Sultan being treated with magic carpets and his own impressive bravado. Sure, it's great to show Aladdin's true character who doesn't know how to properly act, but he still did wish to be a prince and he certainly acted like one here, so why can't he do it here either? Anyways, we already get the suspicion that Jafar knows it's Aladdin by the way he acts and still tries to make a deal with him, just how similar he did the way to end Prince Abubu's life. We then take another long pause from events of the movie when he talked to Genie about not having her love him, with a party being held with his awkward new meeting with Jasmine, where then Genie helps him kill it on the dance floor, which I really don't know why you even needed to have this included. Like, what am I supposed to gain with you adding this scene in the film? Aladdin didn't need to convince Princess Jasmine, who was at the time still dead set on not marrying any prince or even interested at him at all, forcing herself away from him, hence why he spoke to Genie in the next scene rather than to show his cool moves off. Like, there's literally no point to this other than the nice buffer that your movie has a runtime of 2 hours, and it's just a very apparent where it results in you losing time you can never get back even if you love his groove. So we get the same argument play out to be yourself with the new addition that the genie has to spend time with Dahlia to get her out of the way after he talks with her. In this version, she's more suspicious about the prince from Ababwa, a country we haven't even heard before on any map until Genie gets in to actually help, and then offer her to take her on the magic carpet ride leading to a whole new world, compared to getting humiliated by Jasmine at first and then apologizing, saying things like she should have her own choice, leading them to say the familiar words we've all heard before.
Do you trust me?
So now this is the part where we finally go off with a whole new world, and the point where we start talking about the music of the film. As we discussed earlier, they went with a more regional tone to make it feel more live action, and that continues in this very song, where it's probably the worst scene in the entire movie, which is just so sad to think about or talk about regarding Aladdin for the best scene in the entire original with A Whole New World, where the effects and the music do not do what was written justice. The singing also doesn't match the original at all, where the environment they travel just feels so boring. They try to keep it realistic, where they don't travel as far as the animated version when they explore peaks around the world like Egypt and Greece, and just confine it to this region of Agrabah. The original is just filled with so much wonder and awe about the world, and this new version just tears it all up with its focus on the instruments, banging on the drums, or the emphasis on lyrics where you have this nasty feel to it.
Soaring, tumbling, freewheeling through an endless diamond sky.
And then you contrast that with the grandness of this.
Soaring, tumbling, freewheeling through an endless diamond sky.
Like, it's not a hard choice to see what works and what doesn't. You're allowed to feel something when they take flight rather than whatever this is, and they have a confined tone to it. You're reminded how animation also looks so much better when you see the night scenes are just somewhat too dark to even see much on their faces, compared to the original where the environment is lit up. They're in the clouds and they're actually soaring, tumbling, and freewheeling. You can find more reviews out there that say the same thing, where the point still remains the same, that it's just too dull to even like. So after this, they both figure out it's Aladdin because of Abu, who I also forgot to mention because he did not turn into an elephant and stayed a monkey in this film, where Ali still lies and says he's a prince who just mingles like a street rat. Just the same liar who thinks he could have his way out of this where the guard kidnaps him under orders of Jafar, who knows it's Aladdin already while the original just wanted to remove Ali without knowing him quite yet. In this version, Jafar's the one who pushes him off the edge into the water for refusing to give a lamp with this weird slow pause. I mean, what's with these live action remakes trying to be extra? Why even is this in the movie? It just makes it way worse than even the damn sped up footage from earlier where we just slow down time to his inevitable plunge into the sea, just to highlight the most important moment of him being in trouble, where it's just another proof of them padding time for minor inconvenient sequences. Anyways, he still manages to touch the lamp in time for the genie to save him, who can't help him unless he makes a wish, which they circumvent the rule a little in order to do so before he drowns to death. He then thanks him and they go to talk about Jafar with his own tricks. The difference here happens to be Aladdin already went to Jasmine to tell him, who instead lied in a way to make it seem like he wants to invade Agrabah, where the other one is just Sultan who is under Jafar's spell, which is disappointing they went with this because of the shock factor that comes in the form of him appearing like that, like they did for the first time rather than he tattletaled just beforehand. I mean, yeah, he tries it right here, but it's more effective earlier when he escapes, where he realizes it's Aladdin there because he had the lamp. That it's better for him to actually have the reveal that it is Aladdin because he knows it's him that finally survived after what he did earlier and got away before they could arrest him, like they did here. Cause again, what can you really do when Jafar is not really Jafar at all, right? Like, how is he gonna get the lamp now if he's in— oh, right, he has Iago still in this film. Thanks for making another pointless stupid scene, Guy Ritchie. Like, why did you even include the prison scene at all if this was the case? So they just continue with this weird style where Jafar goes in sneak mode to steal the lamp rather than Iago, because he's a parrot, luring out Aladdin while he's here to get the lamp. Like, he's right there, and for sure he could have felt something different if he went to check, since this guy was surrounded spinning around with all that damn weird editing that these films love to do, remembering how Mulan the next year after this film would turn them up to the absolute extreme degree. That I realized that this film actually began the genesis of them making these stupid cuts in certain moments where it's just so revolting and unnecessary to do. Of course, luckily, The Little Mermaid didn't actually take that route, but there was certainly a trend going on visually with this film's editing being absolutely disgusting. That doing this forgets the point of Aladdin and the genie arguing over his choices, choosing to lie rather than to be honest, where he walks off without care while Iago chooses to steal it, not having Jafar become the master pickpocket and then do this. Nope, still don't like it. So, for some reason in the sequence, Aladdin goes back to his home to sing another reprise of One Jump Ahead to continue his feelings, rather than to actually leaving to realize that he could just tell the truth right there. I just don't get this other than the fact that he went out to the streets for Jafar to take the lamp where Ali gets called for the grand announcement by the Sultan, where somehow it's just preferable that he sings a short song back out here rather than be in the palace where he could have told Jasmine the truth in the original if that even made any sense. It's honestly despicable looking back on all these films now and how ridiculously stupid every decision they made was. How on earth could you misunderstand the most basic concepts that the story just took to make it seem more elaborate, complicating things when it just doesn't need to be, just for him when he makes the wish to be Sultan, and then the guy who stole it for the fact that it was Jafar, compared to carelessness when he walked out of the film and went to Jasmine when he was there to witness the transformation. The one that intends to be real by just giving him a new hat and blowing the Sultan's ones off rather than the perfect picture of taking the Sultan's clothes for his own after he makes the wish to become Sultan. That is just so deliciously evil the way they do it, because it strips the powers of the Sultan in a literal sense to transfer it to Jafar rather than, you know, what makes him have a new hat for Jafar to proclaim it as such. Like, because you do have magic in the film, the least you could do was to have that power transfer over to him rather than just have the wind knock off his damn hat. But for some reason they just do this now because of how we talked about Jasmine getting her own solo, replacing the reprise of Prince Ali for Jafar's song because we can't have our villain songs anymore considering he's not that kind of character. So we just instead brought the new ones up. The biggest mistake they could ever make because they thought they could do no wrong by empowering things that are completely misunderstanding the point of what is seen mean now. This song titled Speechless was written by a new team alongside Alan Menken, compared to Beauty and the Beast where the new song was written by Menken and Tim Rice that actually did Aladdin's soundtrack originally, and it's about Jasmine trying to stay quiet when things go wrong and to stand up to oppressive figures like Jafar from zipping them shut. But compared to Evermore, it does not fit the soundtrack of Aladdin at all. It's just something so modern in both lyrics, performance, and instruments that it shouldn't even exist in place of the Prince Ali reprise. I mean, I'm not against Jasmine having a song at all, but it has to fit the right mood, and this one doesn't do it at all, where she enters this weird sequence within our vision, complaining to ghostly images about everyone else. Like it takes place within our head to do what's right and must rise up against them, but still adds no real great value to the story compared to what we already know. I already know her character stands up for herself against them, and I don't need some song to remind me of that, including if it's in this format where its tone doesn't have anything to do with the movie itself. For a remake to be good, its elements have to match, and this doesn't actually match up with anything. It really just doesn't have a good rhythm, if you get what I mean. Of course, I don't have a musical pulse or background, but that's just based on my own observations, where hearing it just made me so confused. It's not really worth replacing Prince Ali reprise because it turns things back on who Aladdin is for Jafar's plans, his control over the genie, and his persistence on delaying telling the truth until it was too late, only now making him sneak back until he got caught. Like there's so much a better purpose to humiliate him for who he was, because that's what he was afraid to be seen as and why the song exists in that format to straighten Jafar's own evil, where this one just seems too boring, safe, and pathetic. So now, he just sends Aladdin by magical transportation rather than part of Agrabah lifting off like a rocket to send him to the ends of the earth in the freezing cold until Carpet comes to rescue him finally, which makes me furious because Carpet did travel all the way here, yet couldn't take these two across the damn world in that own sequence. Like, are you trying to be dull on purpose? Is your whole goal not to be fun? Oh, what am I saying? Of course not. This is a remake. Life is actually removed from any of these films. So they go back to Agrabah, where Jafar now gets the idea to marry Jasmine because he has the power rather than Iago telling him of this idea and then trying to get Genie to fall in love, which he can't. Then instead of going through this new sneak plan, we're going to have him come swoop in when Jasmine can join in and they steal the lamp in that way. In this version, he makes Iago into this monstrous parrot to try to chase after them so we can get some intense fight sequence to make up for its lack of creativity when it comes to trapping Jasmine in a glass or unraveling Carpet and turning Abu into a monkey toy. That all he does here is just create a storm that sucks them back and rips Carpet up, if that's any consolation to make up for his lack of snake-like abilities, because Jafar turning into a large snake perfectly represents who he is as that character, and one who cannot really do that now, or anything for that matter that was learned over the course of this film, where we just make up all these tricks with him freezing them in place and torture Aladdin as the only option left, because you can't really do much in live action, even if you do have powerful genies that they actually can do that, where they can be face to face. So now we just have him ranting like a child that he can do anything to destroy anyone rather than face him off as a giant snake, where Genie in this version actually gets his plan to turn him into a powerful genie rather than not actually knowing to make things uncertain. Like, you prefer the original one because even the genie himself doesn't know what this will do.
Alright, your wish is my command. Way to go, Al.
But how Aladdin was so confident in knowing his great power that must be confined to the laws of the universe, where having him in on it just takes that away. Takes the magic of even Genie, the most powerful being in the room right now, doesn't even know or likes what he's talking about, just to make things more dangerous. Where this one is just about him and his hissy fits not being second fiddle and wanting to be first, that he just rants and raves about things he cannot do rather than delights in having more power than he could possibly imagine, and it makes him look like a pathetic whimpering coward sometimes. Just like his Genie form that's literally a bred version of the actor, instead of having the same design like Genie when he has his hair up in that form, if you know it's just him like that. So we go through the same sequence of him getting a lamp and now finally getting trapped in an itty bitty living space and dragging Iago with him, where you have to mention here, because they do the same route, is where there were plans for a sequel to this film, but how that hasn't moved anywhere since, because he was trapped in the lamp and they wanted to make a new one with elements based on the DVD films, but not exactly. But obviously, with now, after the writer's strike and all the drama that has gone on with remakes, that film is in doubt, where you kinda get the same sequence of Aladdin apologizing for his lies and finally freeing the genie as promised, which was the goal of this movie the whole time, showing the friendship bond between Genie and the Aladdin. In a way, this version still is wonderful, showing that a free genie has less powers, with him being of course in a human form compared to his freed shackles, and it works very fine with what we know for the most part in a live action film, but still not as emotional as the original though, growing alongside this journey where all of his genius transformations still cannot hold back tears for what they went through, having a friend rather than a master or a servant. It's also where you kinda get the origin of the beginning of the film with Dahlia and Genie having a relationship or children, if he even needed one at all in this film with their children on that boat. Just being way too specific in this part of the film about the details of what their life is going to be like, if that's going to happen, and if that's going to be any good for his character. That you just created this new person only for her to have a romantic relationship with the genie, and that's it. That's how you win in this film, because you don't want to third wheel Aladdin and Jasmine's relationship, so you just add a double date to contrast the characters. Even if that wasn't really necessary at all if you get the go of the original. You don't really need her to exist at all, and she's proved it time and time again because she's just useless. So to end things off, her father now in the movie decides to crown her as Sultan already, or according to the wiki, Sultana Regnant to get into specifics, that instead of him being still the Sultan to change the law, he encourages her to take that position of leadership to change it for herself, which also really wasn't the goal either, when it's just about him upholding their traditions to marry a prince until he decided that her love of a street rat was more important than the dumb law, where he had to just go back into the marketplace before she demands herself as Sultan to come back, and they kiss. So finally here they have their marriage and celebrate on a final victory compared to them, who just didn't get married until the final sequel to ride off with carpet into the distance when Genie breaks the fourth wall. Instead, now we deal with this epic dance sequence to A Friend Like Me, with the cast hitting those moves to send us off. Sure, it does look cool and all, and they got them skills, but sometimes it makes you realize that the designs or some of the casts shouldn't actually fit into the region. Sure, it's a fantasy story, and I don't really know much about the history here, but sometimes it feels like a weird mismatch to me, and then the problems with the extras for controversial reasons. But I will say it still is fun, and I'm not going to completely hate it at all for any reason, except for everything else they did like Jafar. So in short, Aladdin is a film that exists to continue the trend, to add nothing really of value except what you could possibly do with a real genie if his name was Will Smith and not Robin Williams. It's not the worst thing that they ever done, but it's also not a good film either, taking away and rearranging what was intended. It's where you realize how important events and circumstances are when they take place in order that they were made in, and how that contributes to your real enjoyment of a film rather than copy-pasting and changing the work up a little. A genesis that started in Beauty and the Beast that we will soon focus enough for doing the same thing but slightly different to make it longer and more profitable, which is all you can say, where at least Mena Massoud was right about his convictions in The Little Mermaid, where this one actually still had more to offer that was less offensive and made more money. And I'm all done. Goodbye.